Be me, Dawn. I don't know. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Danielle Horace, and I am so excited to welcome you to the More Than School Fireside Chats powered by Rise. So we call this series More Than School because all of us here believe that a public education is really just so much more. It's more than classrooms, it's more than curriculum, it's more than standardized tests. Our public schools in Idaho prepare our kids to succeed far beyond the classroom. And to us, even more importantly, our public schools provide equal opportunity for all Idaho children to thrive and reach their potential. So I imagine if you're sitting here listening to this, you might be able to remember one or more teachers who made a difference in your life. Someone who took the time to encourage you, tutor you, help you get past hurdles, and find open doors to your future. I'm excited to get to tell you that you'll get to meet two such educators in just a few moments. But before I pass the microphone over, I want to encourage all of you to check out our last Fireside Chats too. We have sessions with superintendents from all over the Treasure Valley, and I promise you their insights are both interesting, informative, and really valuable. So the way that you can see those is by hopping on our Facebook channel, and you'll see through videos that all of our last ones are stored there, or if that's not your preference, you can go to YouTube, and our channel is Rise Treasure Valley Education Partnership. So I get the chance now to happily introduce you to my colleague, Dr. Dawn Coberly. Dr. Coberly is the retired superintendent of Boise Public Schools after serving 38 years as a public school educator. So he's got some stories and information to share too. He is now the current co-CEO of Rise Treasure Valley Education's Partnership. So Don, welcome and thanks for joining today.
Thanks, Danielle. And you want me to just take it away?
Take it away.
Okay. Well, yeah, we have had some really interesting conversations with superintendents, with teachers from the Treasure Valley, and now that Rise has kind of expanded its mission, we've brought on board some retired superintendents from different parts of the state who can help us to support public education in those areas. And so it's my pleasure today to have a chance to visit with Dr. Geoff Thomas, who is the former superintendent in the Madison School District and now one of the Rise consultants. So welcome, Geoffrey.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. So even though, we've known each other for some time, I think maybe some of our viewers won't know much about you or your background or the Madison School District. So I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about your background, where you grew up, your education, how you decided to become a teacher and an educator and all those kind of things.
Right. Yeah, I grew up in a largely rural area in northwest Wisconsin on a very small family dairy farm. I learned the values of hard work and that the cows had to be milked every day. And I learned that I didn't want to be a dairy farmer. I had an uncle that was a high school English teacher whom I admired. And then my grandmother was one of the first female elementary principals in the state of Massachusetts. And so I had those people in my family to look up to as role models. And when my dreams of playing pro football didn't turn out because I was so skinny, my pajamas only had one stripe. And the coaches didn't recognize my vast athletic talent. I always admired my high school teachers in particular, and felt that was an age I loved history, I loved reading, I loved studying government and so on and so forth. And so I chose that avenue. And, for me, public education has always been very personal. My family was very poor growing up. I always say, when people would break into our house, we would rob them. And we'd get care packages from North Korea. I mean, we were really poor. And for me, public education was a way up and out of my circumstances. And I was always so grateful that for public education that took a chance on a skinny kid from nowhere, Wisconsin, and gave me an opportunity to be involved with athletics, student government, academic courses. The doors were open for me. And I, for my situation, school was a refuge. And I was so grateful that part of that was an idealistic. I want to give other kids the same opportunity that I had. And so I taught high school for 7 years in Utah. I taught history and government and geography. I coached soccer and tennis and basketball. And then in 1991, Idaho Falls School District hired me as an assistant principal at Tateview Junior High, and I worked there for a number of years, and then became high school assistant principal in the Bonneville School District, and then was working on my graduate degrees and whatnot. And then in 2001, I was hired as the Madison School District superintendent, largely based in Rexburg, Idaho, and I just finished up 20 years there and retired, and now I'm an assistant professor at Idaho State University, proud Bengal, and also working with RISE and people I admire in the RISE organization.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that intro for our viewers. So talk a little bit about Southeastern Idaho and the makeup. So you worked in the Bonneville School District, in Idaho Falls, and in Madison. Are those the three largest down there? Is Pocatello or?
Yeah, well, Pocatello's Idaho Falls is the largest.
Okay.
Maybe Bonneville is right now, then Idaho Falls and Pocatello, and then Madison. Madison had about 5,500 students, so considered a large district for Idaho.
Mm-hmm. And Madison High School is a large high school. Isn't it like a 5A high school, the top class?
Yeah, Madison High School is 5A. We have about 1,100 students, grades 10 through 12 at the high school. And then the junior high is even larger. It's like 1,200 at grades 7 through 9, traditional junior high.
Okay. But Madison is still 10-12. You know, there are very few districts in the state that are 10-12. Boise's one of them, and
Right.
Madison's another, but there aren't very many.
Right.
It's a different configuration, isn't it? Do you like
Yeah,
that?
we had kind of a unique configuration in the Madison School District. But yeah, the high school currently is 10 through 12. And I think the plan is to keep it that way for at least the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I kind of like that arrangement,
Yeah.
where the sophomores are the bottom of the totem pole rather than ninth graders.
Yeah. Ninth graders typically struggle to fit anywhere. In 9th and 12, they're the youngest. And then in 9th grade in the junior high, they don't wear the mantle of responsibility as well as other grades.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
How about the demographics of the Madison district?
Yeah.
Poverty and et cetera.
Yeah, Madison is it's an interesting dynamic because we have Brigham Young University in our backyard, and so
Sure.
it's the county's largest employer, with the school district being the second largest. So we have a number of students that come to us that they're sons and daughters of the professors up on campus, or support staff or administration, with the university there. And then so we're about 92% Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
But an interesting thing about the Madison district, we have students that come to BYU Idaho from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have 17 different languages that students speak in the district. And so we're a little bit more diverse than what people would think. And we're also have a higher poverty level because, college students at whatever, they're typically not very wealthy. And in the district, in the rural parts of our district, poverty levels are pretty high. So it's an interesting dynamic of a university background and then high poverty levels.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, Madison's pretty close to or a little above the state average overall. Does that sound about right to you?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what were your biggest challenges? I'm always interested because being a retired superintendent, I can talk about some of the challenges I had in Boise. What did you find in Madison? What were your biggest challenges?
Well, when I arrived in 2001, the buildings were in absolute deplorable condition. I was shocked because Madison had enjoyed a good reputation, academically.
Right.
And then athletically, when I was in the Bonneville or Idaho Falls district, it seemed like every contest we were getting beat by the Madison kids. And so I wasn't that familiar with their buildings when I took the job, and I received a tour. The junior high was wrapped in hazmat or tape, warning tape, and people were going in and out in hazmat suits because of the asbestos issue. We had two schools that were still coal-fired in 2001.
Wow.
We had buildings that were over 100 years old. And what I found is that when trying to repair or bond for new buildings, the attitude of the people were like, well, you don't take care of your buildings. Why should we give you more money? Because you didn't take care of the buildings that you had or the money, prior. And I said, I couldn't speak to what had happened before me. I could only do what I could do when I got on the job and move forward. Right. So wrestling with outdated buildings in disrepair was a real challenge. Mm-hmm. Old, antiquated, bad plumbing, bad wiring, bad heating, no air conditioning, and then let alone not much in the way of technology. So that was a real challenge. And people in the Madison School District in Rexburg, they have the 10 Commandments and a $20 bill, and they don't want to break any of them. So they're very wallet retentive, very fiscally conservative, and you have to work with that mindset. And so we had to prove to them that when they invested their money into children and into the current administration and what we were trying to do for buildings and for their kids and for the staff, it took a while to build that trust. So that was probably the number one biggest challenge. Yeah. And like unto it, it was being in the shadow of BYU Idaho, and they had tremendous resources, and they just had to answer to an ecclesiastical group where I had to answer to the entire community. Right. And people would compare and contrast us and say, well, how come BYU Idaho has they just build buildings, and how come you can't just do that? So trying to explain the different funding sources. I couldn't run to Salt Lake City and ask them for money. I guess I could. They wouldn't give me any. So we had to, and I said, the world membership of the LDS Church contributes to your buildings there. We have to rely on ourselves here locally. Right. And so it was good to be in an education-minded community. And I love Rexburg. I love the community. The people are awesome. But it was a challenge being compared, A, to a university, and B, to a private university, which had access to much greater funding than we did.
Oh, interesting. So did you run a couple bonds during your tenure?
Many bonds. Yeah, in my 20 years, we ran 11 different bond and or levy elections. We brought in $123 million to the district.
Wow.
We built new elementaries. We remodeled every building. We shut several buildings down, and then, of course, built a new high school as well. And I think they're really well poised for the future. But after that, and we started barely, I have some wisdom, because wisdom comes from good experience, and good experience comes from bad experience. And I was able to learn from our first failed bond what to do and what not to do. And then we started implementing some steps. And by the end, we were getting 81.5% support for our bonds and levies, and the community really trusted us. But it took a long time.
Yeah, it's such a key to build that trust in your community, and the superintendent being the face. You're out in the community talking to groups, and this is what's going on in our schools, and we're doing this and we're doing that, and it just takes a while.
It did. It took a lot of relationship building, networking, getting key people to understand where we were going, getting parents to understand what we were trying to do, but in the end, it worked out really well.
Yeah. So you must get Madison must get a lot of its teachers from BYU Idaho.
Yeah, virtually all of our teachers from BYU Idaho, which is a blessing and a curse. And the good thing is there's a ready supply. The negative is they don't stay with us. So we would be training up to 20, 25, 28% new staff every year. And we could hire them, but trying to get them to stay, especially we would lose them to Wyoming. We would lose them to surrounding states that pay better. And that became very frustrating. And I was okay with losing them to Wyoming, which is natural resources rich. Right. But when we started losing them to Utah, I began to despair. I was like, oh, when we were paying less than Utah, it was a sad day. But
that's got to be frustrating, because you're sitting over there in Rexburg, a great place to live, and yet your teachers are going across the border because because of pay. And now it seems like it's become an even more of an issue than just pay.
Right.
I mean, we seem to be losing teachers for a lot of reasons, but part of it is, I don't know, that they feel respected anymore.
Don, and you make a really good point. It's money is one thing, and no one goes into public education, thinking they're going to amass a hoard of wealth. They're not going to become rich. People that want to make money go into private or some other enterprise. But there's things that we can do at the local level, and we tried, and I know you tried in Boise. We tried to help our teachers with professional development and encouragement and support. But if they don't sense it from the state level, if it's just lip service, you're our highest priority, K-12 teachers, and then that doesn't translate into a succession of salary increases or help with health insurance costs. But it becomes demoralizing after a while if they don't feel supported by our elected leaders at the state level. And it becomes really frustrating when other states are beckoning to them saying, come to our state because we value you here. And in our state, it's, well, they don't really care, and we don't really trust them, they're doing a good job, or they're teaching weird theories which none of that is true. But when you're battling that mindset, particularly permeating from the state level, it becomes very frustrating. And I remember, actually begging teachers to stay.
Yeah.
Key teachers that we needed working with our severe needs population, our vocational teachers, our high-end math and science teachers. But the charm and good looks of the superintendent only go so far.
Well, that's for sure. But, it seems to me, though, it's becoming a pipeline problem, too. I mean, we're not getting as many educators out, and we're losing them, and
yeah,
it's
very true. And then the induction process is expensive.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time, train. Brand new teachers are great because they come to us with enthusiasm and they love kids and they want to work with them, and it's great. But they're not at the peak of their profession, and there's a lot of professional development that's required. And so we're spending, tens of thousands of dollars to get our teachers up, brand new teachers up to snuff and trained and ready to go. And, it takes a few years to hit your stride as a teacher. And then to lose them after 2, 3, 4, 5 years to other states, or they go back to BYU, Idaho, or they go to the private industry because they can see down the road it's not going to be productive for them.
Yeah.
It is so frustrating. But
so what's the solution? I mean, we have a career ladder in place that's done quite a bit at the entry level. What needs to be done?
I think, number one, it starts at the top. Teachers need to feel valued, and they need to feel trusted. That they're trusted with our most precious resources, our children and grandchildren. We need to trust them that they're doing a good job, that they're doing their level best. And they shouldn't have to be, subjected to the annual, beat up and beat down when the legislature convenes. I mean, some of the things that our state legislators are saying about teachers it's just completely inaccurate. And many of those folks that have been elected haven't darkened the door of a school in decades. So they don't know. So they just parrot what they hear on extremist radio or talk shows or whatever. And teachers get demoralized. They're like, well, doesn't anybody care about us? It shouldn't be a dogfight every year for teachers to be reasonably compensated for their work and to be thanked for their work.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be a fist fight every year. And when the legislature gets together, it should be, thank you, teachers, for doing a great job. And they do a great job. Yep. You put your money where your mouth is. All 5 of my children are public school graduates. I trusted them with their teachers. I trusted the principals. I trusted the local control that the locally elected school board, superintendents, teachers, administrators, principals, support staff have our kids' best interests in mind. And that should be permeated throughout the state. We value your service, like we do with our military. Whenever I'm at a public function, they always say, would the members of the military, veterans, please stand up, or if you're active service, stand up. They stand up and they get a round of applause. And it's heartfelt because we appreciate them putting their lives on line for our safety and defense. I would love it just one time if someone would say, would our Frontline teachers, educators, please stand up. Or if you're a veteran, stand up and give them a round of applause. Or nurses or doctors or
Yeah.
those, policemen. The frontline people working with our kids should be valued. They should be respected. They're doing a great job. And I think it starts at the top, and it shouldn't just be lip service. This year alone, we're sitting on a $1.5 billion surplus. What I don't want to see is a massive tax cut given to the ultra wealthy and corporations. Let's invest in our kids. Let's invest in the teachers. Let's invest in the districts, and let's trust the locally elected officials like school boards to carry out their important mission. I know I get worked up when I talk about it, but I'm passionate about this. We need to trust them.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think it's good to get worked up about it, because it seems to me when we did our poll, and for those who aren't familiar, Rise did a poll this summer and asked some questions about education, and people in our state value teachers.
They do.
And they trust teachers. And so if we heard that echoed at the state level, it sure would help.
Right. And it needs to be, it's one thing, teachers would hear me say how much I cared about them and parents and, locally, but then they get this mixed message and sometimes overtly negative message from the state, or someone at the state says, well, you're our number one priority. Well, and they don't back it up with money. And then they launch into some investigation on this and that, and the other thing, which on wildly untrue and inaccurate theories.
Yeah.
Anyway.
The two of us were in education for quite some time, put together probably, close to 80 years. I hate to say that, but probably true. And, I visited a lot of high school classrooms, middle school class. That was really one of the joys of the job was being in the class. And quite frankly, when I went into classrooms, I knew exactly what the teacher was teaching. It was right out of our curriculum. And if it was government, it might be separation of powers, for example, and the teacher would be doing, a discussion about that. And it seemed to me wherever I went, teachers are teaching the curriculum. They didn't really have time to do a lot else, quite frankly. And I didn't know any who wanted to.
Right. Our curriculum is so rich that, and there's so much material that needs to be covered. We have standards that have been approved by our local boards and by the state, and the teachers teach those standards. And they're all, publicly reviewed, publicly approved, and implemented. We work with our teacher association. They know what's going on. Our principals know the curriculum. We send home all kinds of information home to parents, so they're aware of what's being taught. And, many of the teachers are recording their classrooms, because sometimes, especially in COVID, they're recording their classroom presentations so students at home can see them. There's nothing is hidden. It's all out in the open, and it's good. It's solid. It's normal. I know when I taught American government, and I taught it for 7 years, and I taught at the university level, there's nothing more boring than a professor that shares their opinion and then tries to make that sound like scripture. Mm-hmm. What I told my students, and it's echoed throughout classrooms in Idaho at the K-12 and university level, is here's this information. Here's a variety of things you need to think about. Come up with your own ideas about what you think is proper. And here's the standard. We teach about this. We teach about that. We teach about this and that. And there really isn't time left over to divulge or divert into some obscure economic or political theory that is discredited anyway.
Yeah.
So,
part of the reason there's not enough time for anything extra is because we spend 7-8 hours every kid taking an assessment in grades 3 through 8 and 10, and then we give the SAT to every junior. And then we give the IRI to every student in K through 3.
Right.
The IRI actually does provide some pretty good feedback.
Right.
But I've been frustrated, and I think you have too. We've commiserated a bit about the assessments that we give and the lack of information they provide that's valuable for principals, teachers, superintendents. Would you care to comment? I know you have some opinions on this.
I do, and they're strong opinions, and it's based in research. The SBAC, or ISAT, but I call it the SBAC because that's really what it is, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium test, is a waste of time. And the problem is it's very expensive and it takes an inordinate amount of time and it tells us nothing. These kids take this standardized test and then the teachers don't get the result until the summer when the kids have already moved on to a different grade and then you're getting a new set of kids coming in. It's an enormous waste of time. And there's almost a one-to-one correlation between income level of the student and how well they do on the test. The standardized tests aren't there because they tell us anything. They're there because it's easy to corral people into a single digit or a double digit number. So Bob is a 25, he can go to Boise State. Sam is a 17, he should go somewhere else. Someone else is a 31, they can go to Harvard. It's ridiculous. And the thing is, those don't prove to be very valid because our universities don't even look at those anymore as a criteria. What is more important are the GPAs of the students. On a trimester system, a senior high student will have 18 different independent evaluators looking at their work, essays, portfolios, projects that they've done. But those take time, and people are complex. You can't narrow down a person's future to a single score. So these, number one, they're expensive. Number two, they'll take up to 6 weeks of instructional time to administer. And then they don't tell us anything on the back end. We just need to eliminate them entirely. Like you say, the IRI is different because it provides, data to where the kids are reading wise when they're young. But by the time they're in high school, you can learn a lot more by looking at a student's GPA. It shows their work ethic. It shows their attendance, their punctuality, all the things that are required in the world of work or schooling after K-12. Then a standardized test score shows. I have been a vocal opponent of these scores because they don't tell us anything. They're not valid.
It seems to me, and I mean, we're required to give tests in 3 through 8, and then once in high school by the what is it now, ESSA, the federal law associated with Title I, and yet I think, there's room then for having an assessment that would actually give us some information that we could use to improve instruction.
Right.
And you can do, it seems, you could do some sort of a pre-post test. I know some states are doing that and get good information and give good information to parents.
Right.
I also would say, Jeffrey, that the teacher knows more than those standardized tests.
They do, and if a parent ever wonders how their student is doing in English or math or, whatever the subject might be, just call the teacher and the teacher can give you a really good assessment. Most of our teachers do common end of course assessments.
Right.
Those are formative assessments. They do the pre and post test. We've been doing them for years and the information is remarkably accurate. It accurately reflects how the student is doing and how they're progressing on the state-approved standards and the class standards and so on and so forth. There's other tests that don't take very much time, like the MAP test, and there's just one, but there's many others. That's about a 45-minute test. When we talk about the SBAC, for a third grader, we're talking 6 to 9 hours of evaluation on kids sitting at a computer screen, some 9-year-old. To me, it's institutionalized child abuse. We shouldn't be requiring these things. We can do formative in-class assessments that give parents and teachers real-time data on how Johnny or Susie are doing. Yeah. We don't need the federally enforced, state-imposed SBAC test to tell us that. We can go to our child's teacher and find out that information in real time right away. And that's how I direct parents. I say, don't worry about the stupid SBAC results because they're worthless, and they really are. Go to your child's teacher and ask. And have a sit-down meeting.
It's funny, Jeffrey. I went down. We did Kobe Dennis and I did a workshop down at Senate Ed a couple of years ago, where we showed them some results from our end of course test in U.S. history, And we actually, in that case, did a pre-post on the second semester. And so we'd ask the question and ask it again at the end of the semester. And it was amazing when I was able to say, well, this concept, 40% of the kids knew it, or 35% knew it at the beginning of the semester. And guess what? It was 90% at the end.
Right. Yeah.
And in that way you can, because I think one of the problems is with these assessments that we have, like the SBAC, we're put in the position of trying to explain something that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And if you can say, well, yeah, our kids really learned this content, then you're able to share some information that's important to parents.
And that's information that's important to parents. How has my child grown intellectually, academically in the 12 weeks or 16 weeks or whatever it might be in your class? And you can you can chart the growth.
Right.
So very important.
Good stuff. So let's talk a little bit about what gives you hope for K-12 education in our state.
I think two things.
Hope and for the future.
Right. I have 5 children and 6 grandchildren, and my grandchildren now are getting to the age where they're going into school. And whenever I see children going to school, I have hope for the future. I was holding my newest grandson yesterday. I was holding him, for about an hour, and just, realizing the incredible potential that these children have. And if we can continue doing what we're doing in public education, we can't eliminate all the obstacles for them in their lives, but we can provide them with an equal playing ground, or as equal as we can make it, to give them a great shot academically at life. And so when I see kids going to school, I have hope for the future. And it's inspiring to see how far advanced they are with the new technologies and everything that we didn't have when we were young. I went to school in the Paleolithic era. It's just, when I see that, that gives me hope right then and there.
I was on Twitter today, and somebody posted they had gone and visited a advanced placement classroom at one of our high schools in Boise, and had taken pictures of some of the examples of the theses they were proposing and the research they were doing in his AP capstone course. And I went, okay, now you tell me there's not hope for the future.
Right.
The
second thing, Don, that I, in addition to what I just mentioned, year after year, decade after decade, our parents, our Idaho parents and grandparents, are behind us. They support us. That gives me hope. No matter what, whenever I look at surveys, the one that RISE did or others that are similar, people support public education. And I think, and the closer they get to home, the more they support it. Sometimes nationally they go, oh, I'm worried about public ed. But do you like it in Arco? Do you like it in Boise? Do you like it in Moscow? Do you like it in Mullen? Do you like, the answer is yes. Overwhelmingly, parents and grandparents support us. Yeah. And that gives me hope as well.
Right. Which is, it brings us back then to local control. Right. Because that's what they say in our poll and others. Hey, I want those decisions made at my local school board meetings by people that I voted to represent me.
And Don, I don't know how it was in Boise. It may be a little different. Rexburg's not that big of a town. And when people wanted to see me, oftentimes they would just walk in and sit down in my office. They would say, hey, I need to talk to you about something. I'm either happy about this or unhappy about that. And I would go to the grocery store and people would talk to me. I'd go to the movie theater and people would talk to me. They would stop me in church and say, hey, I didn't want to bother you at work, so I'm going to bother you here in Sunday services. Right. And, they see me on the street or they see me in the park. People would talk to me, and there's instant accessibility to school board members that are locally elected, to myself, to people that are, support staff and others. And I think that's why we get such great support at the local level, because they know us as people and they trust us. And if they have a concern, they can share it in real time. They don't have to, if you try to go see Senators Crapo or Risch, you'll never get in. It's hard to, schedule time to see the governor. But by cracky, you can find, your local school board members and your local superintendent pretty easily. And it's the way it should be. Yeah. We should be accessible, and we are. And I think that's where that trust is generated. They know their children's teachers. They know the children's principal. They know the secretary, the bus drivers, the food service people, their neighbors. We're their neighbors. And they can, see us and talk to us. And that's where the trust is engendered.
Yeah, and I think that's true across the state, that superintendents and school boards are respected, and they're members of their communities.
Right.
And that brings that local control issue home, in that they can come in and talk to you, and they do.
Right. Well, I didn't put my kids in private schools, and there's private schools in Rexburg. I put them in public schools because I trust the teachers and I trust the system. And so when people would say, well, you don't really know what's going on, I said, no, wait a second. My kids go here.
Yep.
I do know what's going on. And I'm like you mentioned, Don, I'm in the buildings every day. I'm visiting classrooms every day.
Yeah.
And it's, like you say, one of the greatest joys of being a superintendent.
Absolutely. Okay, we got a couple more questions. We're going to have to fit these in the next 10 minutes.
Okay.
So which state legislation, just pick one issue, worries you the most in upcoming sessions?
I'm really worried that because of COVID, that two things. I'm worried because of COVID that our current system, that funding for school districts is based on average daily attendance instead of overall enrollment, is going to kick districts financially in the teeth. Obviously with COVID and the fear of COVID or other communicable, type, flu diseases, that type of thing, more and more children are staying home as soon as they have a symptom, they're home.
Right.
And if the current model isn't amended by the legislature and or the state board, it's going to be financially devastating to districts. I really, really worry about that. And I'm hoping that the legislature will and the state board will work together and say, we need to fund our districts based on student numbers and not on average daily attendance. So that's probably my number one fear.
And big thing, because, average daily attendance used to be, I don't know, in Boise it was like 96%. I'm sure it was similar in Rexburg, but now we see school districts that are at 80%.
Right.
That kind of explains, if you're getting 80%, that's different than getting 96, 97, and which is different than just counting enrollment and saying, hey, there's kids absent, but you still got to have a teacher.
Well, and we have teachers under contract.
Right.
And then let's say the funding is cut by 20%. Where do you go?
Yeah.
You eventually you have to start cutting personnel, and that's the exact opposite of what anyone wants to do. Yeah. Eventually you not only trim away the fat, you cut into the meat and cut into the bone. Yeah. And if we don't make an adjustment in Idaho, I'm really worried about that. That's probably my primary thing. And then I worry as well, Don, about any kind of weird diversion of public funds, scarce public funds, to vouchers. Mm-hmm. And it's been proposed before, and no doubt it'll come back again. But what most people don't realize, a voucher is a subsidy for the rich. And people say, well, I just wanted my money to follow my child. Well, yeah, but private schools are immensely expensive. And poor people, it's like the analogy I use is, let's say, a brand new Cadillac. A rich person, they're going to buy the Cadillac anyway. But if they get a $5,000 or $10,000 subsidy from the government, they're like, oh, great. Well, a poor person, even if they get the same voucher money, the $5,000 or whatever it is, it doesn't begin to cover the cost of a private school or a parochial school. So all it does is divert scarce public resources to private venues. It's a subsidy for the rich, and I think it's wrong.
That really explains it pretty well.
Public schools should be funded publicly. If a person wants to choose a private or parochial school, I'm okay with that. We've had those since the founding of the country, but pay for it privately. Yeah. I don't want to use my tax dollars to subsidize private education, and I don't want my public money subsidizing parochial or church-based private schools.
Right.
I don't want to fund the Church of the Four-Sided Triangle. I just don't want to do it.
Well, that's an interesting point. I think one of the other things that I've heard that's intriguing about the whole thing is that, when you look at a voucher system, it's going to benefit some areas of the state a lot more than others.
Right.
And rural Idaho does not benefit from a voucher system because there aren't any private schools out there.
Right. Where are children in ARCO supposed to go?
Yeah.
So in theory, it sounds good to perhaps the fiscal elite or some elite somewhere, but it doesn't benefit average Idahoans. And if it doesn't benefit the average person in Idaho and their children, why would we do it? Or why would we consider it?
One final question before we kind of sum up the conversation, which is going to be hard to do, by the way. What advice would you give to a young person that's considering education as a career? Would you tell them to follow their passion, or should they just stay away, or what?
Well, 4 of my 5 children are working in public ed, so that's probably how I would lean. I taught in public schools and served in public schools because I felt called to the work. From an early age, like I mentioned, when my pro football, dreams were dashed in like 9th grade, and I realized, my near skeletal physique wasn't going to take an NFL pounding. I wanted to teach. And it was an inner passion for me to work with young people, especially high school kids. That's the age group I worked with, and to help prepare them for college or post-secondary education and for the world of work. And it was, I loved it, and I still love it. And it was something that, painters have to paint, singers have to sing. I had to teach. And if a person feels that way from inside their heart, that's what they're called to do, then do it. And you're going to have to learn to live with, it's not very lucrative, but the rewards of educating the future are just astronomical. You'll never regret touching the lives for the better of young people and preparing them to become productive citizens and adults. And I loved it. So despite it didn't pay very well, but I think you need to follow your passion and do what you're called to do. And, for me, it was teaching, and for many others, it's teaching, and it's a noble career.
Yeah. And then we can work on just getting more support and trust from the top, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, let's see, we've covered a lot of ground. Interesting conversation with you about assessment, talking about the SBAC and the lack of value therein. And we've been around a while, so we've had to deal with that assessment and try to counsel teachers about
right.
I don't want to give it, but and I think it's really important that people understand that's an assessment that we need to have a hard look at,
right?
Probably along with the SAT for all, in terms of why we're doing that. Second, we talked about the teacher pipeline issue and teacher salaries and the fact that we're losing teachers to out of state and to other districts and to other professions, et cetera. And it seems to me that's a real dire situation right now. We know that from some of the research at the university level that students majoring in education have been declining for a while, and we're really seeing it in our schools. Care to comment a little bit more about that, or you?
Well, no, and it's true. Those are salient issues that all need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
We need caring, certified, effective teachers, and they need to be paid, and compensated appropriately. And we need to eliminate some of this extraneous assessments. I used to tell the teachers, I'd say, don't worry about the SBAC results. I've never looked at them. We don't care about them. What I care about is that kids in your class have a connection with you and that they're learning and growing to their and your satisfaction. If that's the case, don't worry about this other stuff.
Yeah.
But we need to have like you say, take a hard look at those.
Yeah. But then finally, we talked a little bit about, some other things, but legislation or possible legislation that worries us and the ADA versus enrollment quandary that districts are facing,
right?
Which has the potential to be really, really serious for really every district in the state.
Well, if you think, Don, of our current funding model, and most people don't know this, but we're the lowest per pupil expenditures in the nation. Idaho has the lowest. Then to think about that, you don't even get that amount. You get 94% or 92% or 95% of that very low amount. You don't even get the full amount. We had a term for it in the dairy farm. It was called bass backwards. It just doesn't make sense. It should be, districts should be fully funded on how many students they have. And, that makes sense to me.
And then we talked a little bit about vouchers as well. Looks like it might be coming back again this year. So it'll be something that we'll have to peer down there and talk about the reasons for not doing that as well. Jeffrey, it has been a pleasure visiting with you. We've known each other a long time. We were superintendents at the same time, but never really had a chance to get to this in-depth level of conversation that we've had for the last 45 minutes. And we're having a lot of fun working together. And our next couple of Meet Our Superintendents will be with our other RISE consultants, Will Overgard and Teresa Fabricius. So thanks again, Jeffrey, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate the invitation.